Welcome ladies and gents, Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter. Of course, you can subscribe to the channel. Let's talk boxing. Let's talk about the boxer card, and we'll start off with the main event. Azim beat Santos Reyes on points. It's the first time anyone's taken Azim the distance since his debut against Ed Harrison. Now, at the time, Azim was only 18 years old, and you expect a fighter to mature and grow and gain man strength and stuff like that. And since then, nobody's been able to take that firepower. And we know that he's a wonderful athlete. And stylistically speaking, it reminds me an awful lot of Ryan Garcia, both in terms of some of the strengths he has, but also a couple of the weaknesses. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But this is a kid who's got an awful lot that you can like, that you can really, put your hat on and say, this is a kid that really could potentially go far here. His athleticism is absolutely superb. He picks his shots. He's a thinking fighter. Just like Ryan Garcia, he's very, very good with that lead hand. Very fast jab, very good hook. He's varied with the lead hand, not just from the hook. He can throw a shovel hook, he can throw an uppercut, and he can do it with a leading shot. So he could land a lead uppercut on you. And those aren't easy shots to land. They're high risk shots, and he's able to get away with it. His understanding of distance is excellent. And much like Ryan Garcia, he can vary the power and the speed of that lead hand and almost offer you bait. So when he is touching you and you think, right, I'm going to go for a trigger counter, the minute he touches my gloves, I'm going to leap him with a hook. He'll take a step back and then he can punish you with a backhand, which is what he did today. Now, his power is predominantly, I believe, in his right hand. With Ryan Garcia, I think it's in that lead hand. So I'm not saying they're clones of each other or anything like that, but there's just a lot there that I see, which I can see sort of certain similarities. But he's a thinking fighter. He'll pick his shots. Now, in terms of a couple of weaknesses, areas that I think he's going to have to work on. And remember, he's 20 years old, so I'm not running him down. I'm high on him as a talent. But you have to understand, when you're judging a prospect who's 20 years old, and a lot of people are talking about him moving through the gears, you have to consider the weaknesses potentially for down the line, right? What he's got to improve on before he gets to that destination. And a couple of those things is that one of the things, he fights quite upright, quite tall, much like Ryan, but he pulls out in straight lines. And when you're pulling out in straight lines, you're very reliant on your reflexes, and those reflexes are brilliant. His distance control like that is very good. But if there's a second phase of attack, because he leans onto that lead foot quite often, and then he pulls back for that first phase attack, as he's pulled back and he's leant onto that back foot, there's a slight delay potentially to then exit again the second time. And if you do, he could be exiting in a straight line. He's not really prepared to pivot out because he shifts off from that weight onto that back foot. So he's almost stuck. And with that second phase of attack, you could potentially start catching him with these rising hooks. And even tonight, Santos Reyes was landing that left hook pretty consistently for a guy that wasn't landing much, right? You're not going to, obviously, if he was going to fight a top level fighter and he got caught with those amount of left hooks, you're going to say it was a great night. But against the guy who's not in the top 100 with BoxRec, yes, he's undefeated. Yes, Shane McGuigan described him as tough as old boots, and you can't disagree with that. But in terms of their levels, he's not at the level of Azim. So he was getting caught with too many shots that were rising left hooks. And sometimes they weren't even rising. When I say rising, I'm talking about out of the position of a crouch, because he's quite upright and he's not coming out the pocket. He's almost like this head on a stick, and you could catch him. But it wasn't just that. It was also at times whereby there was a bit of a tell on him trying to launch a lead left hook. There were moments where he'd shift his weight onto that lead foot and come outside the line of the shoulder of the opponent, and he's loading up to throw either a left hook, a left shovel hook, or an uppercut. And that slight pause is almost that moment it felt like he was trying to decide on his shot selection. Slight pause, and then he'd go for it. And aesthetically, it looks wicked. It looks flash, right? A lot of swagger there. But Reyes started to read that. And on that pause, he'd start to punch with Azim. And on numerous occasions, he was catching him with that left hook. They were landing together. And that's a very high risk thing. Now, Teofimo Lopez, when he fought Richard Comey, one of the things that he did was pause in the middle of a sequence to draw Richard Comey's shot in and then counter that. And that's how he dropped him, basically. If you're going to give the opponent a pattern to read, make sure you're aware of when he's read it and then use it as a trap. Drop that pause, and so you're going to throw that lead shot. Instead, feint it, so he'll throw the left hook with you, pull back, and then come back with a power shot down the pipe, a right hand down the pipe. And he does set traps, right? He is a thinking fighter. But on this particular shot selection, he was caught a little bit too much for my liking. And against a big puncher, a guy who's got a big left hook, because he fights quite upright as well, that could be problematic for him moving forward. So yeah, I would like to see him change the height dynamic a little bit on his exit point, and also think about how he shifts weight when he's going to back up more consistently. Generally speaking though, listen, brilliant performance, shot selection was fantastic. He's thinking about what he's doing in there. This guy is a real talent, there's no doubt about it. In terms of who he goes in there with next, they're talking a lot about Dalton Smith. Personally, I'd want to see Adam Azim develop a little bit more. This is the first guy that's been able to take him 10 rounds. Don't throw him in there against Dalton Smith just yet, in my humble opinion. But the talent is there. So he's 20 years old. Take your time with him, build him up. You can start talking about that fight now, but don't let it happen for another 18 months or so, in my humble opinion. That's how they need to be thinking. Stick to the development fights, get him out as much as possible against durable guys who offer different types of skill sets and help Adam Azim develop. Moving on from that, let's talk about ZAK CHELLI beating Anthony SIMS Jr. on points. Many people were picking Anthony SIMS Jr. He has that history with Matchroom. It didn't work out for him well there, but he's 23-1. The one defeat he had, he lost to Angulo via split decision. He's nicknamed the Magician coming out of LA. And so a lot of people felt that, ZAK, they thought, listen, this is a domestic guy. He's going to struggle a little bit here. But, sometimes a lot of people consider swagger or flamboyance or even athleticism alone as being the equivalent to skill. They'll see flash and hand speed, for instance, and I think it's skillful. They'll see a lot of movement where someone's showing a lot of upper body movement and agility, and they'll think that's skill. It is a skill to be able to be agile, but skills are about capabilities essentially, and how well you're capable of executing specific things. If you're not executing those specific things very well, despite the swagger, it's a little bit, exaggerated to speak about somebody's audacious skills. Now, I don't know what he's like in the gym. He could very well be a magnificent fighter in the gym, Anthony SIMS Jr., and hence why he's got the nickname The Magician. But to me, it looks like he tries to fight in a style where he doesn't have the capability to pull off that style. He fights out of a bounce, and I've spoken before that I don't like bounces. They can be used for certain specific types of fighters, but generally speaking, it can give a tell. When you're on the bounce, at the top of your bounce, you're incapacitated. You can't do anything until you're back down and coiled again. And so you can be timed. But that aside, he's got this low left hand. And you see that ZAK CHELLI's entry point was really all about trying to come inside, bend forward, and load up with this over-the-top right hand. It was a shot that he was throwing consistently. And listen, he varied it, in fact, because there were times where he was coming low and whipping it around, and there were other times where he was coming low and almost throwing it like a cricket ball, so it's almost coming down the pipe. Regardless, though, it's a shot that if your distance control is on point, you really should see coming. You see, we'll talk about VIDDAL RILEY later on and how he was able to deal with that, because his opponent was trying to use that quite a bit as well. But the point is, you really need to see it coming in, especially if you're bouncing in and out of range, on the edge of range. When he's going to then come with that sort of shot, you should be able to just step outside of range and then punish him for it. Or step outside of range and then step around him, because once he's committed and his weight shifted onto that lead foot and he's low, there's only a selection of few shots he can throw from that position. He can come up with an uppercut, a left shovel hook, or he has to stand up tall to throw a hook, which can also be capitalized on. You can time that as he's rising and you could land a really big counter left hook to hurt him. The point is, there's only a select few things he can do from that position. So if you step around him, you've got a massive opportunity to get the angle on him and really go to work. He wasn't able to do that really at any point consistently. And so he was not really executing what he was supposed to do from a technical perspective, and he wasn't even able to bite down on his gum shield and say, right, I'm going to go to war now, and be able to hang with ZAK CHELLI in the balls department, so to speak. Round 8, he gave a good account of himself. And even that round was pretty close, right? I know a lot of people are going to judge the aggression and the tempo of Anthony SIMS, but ZAK CHELLI was still landing shots in that round too. His boxing, in some ways, he was outboxed for much of it. And then when he had to try and bite down on his gum shield, he was outfought by a very game ZAK CHELLI. A lot of people felt that ZAK CHELLI was sort of overrated and they wrote him off at a period in his career because he came onto the scene trash talking Billy Joe Saunders at that press conference. And if you're going to trash talk a guy like Billy Joe, you better be a good fighter, right? And he didn't really go on to achieve a lot of the things that perhaps he expected to achieve early doors in his career. He does have that draw with Jack Cullen. He lost to Cody Davis as well. So a lot of people were saying, oh, okay, this was a guy with just bluster. But if you look at his last 3 fights, he beat Jack Kilgannon, who was an undefeated 11-0 fighter. He stopped him. He beat Jermaine Brown 12-0. He beat him on points. And now Anthony Sims Jr., who many people felt would beat ZAK CHELLI. CHELLI came through that as well. So he's now starting to really build up a head of steam. He's ranked in the top 20 now by BoxRec, 19th in the world. So it'll be interesting to see where they go with ZAK CHELLI from here. But you can see he's very high on confidence and he's fun to watch. Moving on from ZAK CHELLI, let's talk about VIDDAL RILEY against ANEES TAJ. And ANEES TAJ was a very aggressive character. I didn't want to talk to the interviewer pre-fight. He really wanted to get at VIDDAL RILEY. ANEES TAJ is 7-2. Prior to tonight, but he was aggressive, and I think he realized that this was his moment. If he could beat a guy like VIDDAL RILEY, who's a talented, undefeated cruiserweight, who's also got a social media presence, it could put you back on the TV sort of a schedule. And he did well enough to be able to get back on TV. And you heard that Ben Shalom was talking about how he wanted to get him back out there. So he's done himself no harm in terms of his stock. First round, you saw VIDDAL RILEY pump out that jab, really nice, solid jab, nice movement, changing the levels, and you saw that ANEES TAJ was out of his depth. The second round was interesting, though. We spoke about that over-the-top right hand a moment ago. He was actually finding a home for that against VIDDAL RILEY in that second round. And you saw that RILEY was struggling a little bit with the distance. He was getting caught a little bit too much with it. And then in the third round, that's when you saw the adjustment. And you started to see as that right hand's coming over, he's going to change the level. He's going to shoot up that up jab. He's going to step back and then throw the right hand. And he was just able to time ANEES TAJ. And you saw really what a really good boxer and someone like VIDDAL RILEY is capable of doing. Bear in mind, like I said, social media presence. But this is a guy that beat Chris Billam-Smith in the amateurs. So you know that this is a guy who's been boxing since he was young. There's pedigree there. And I really like him. I think he's a good fighter. Obviously, he's operating at a lower level, but they're talking about potentially taking him to the end of the year before he starts to fight for titles. And he's still domestic level. But I really like what I see from VIDDAL RILEY, and I'm looking forward to seeing a lot more of him again and again. I think he's a talented kid and he's got some charisma. So it'll be interesting to see where they take him from here. I wasn't able to see the Tyler Denny-Brad Pauls fight in its entirety. But I will say that from what I did see, Brad Pauls seemed to be too keen on trying to sort of pick his shots and fight at a lower tempo, and he couldn't seem to match the tempo of Tyler Denny. But when Pauls was landing, he did seem to be having an effect. He just needed to up the tempo and push Tyler Denny back, from what I saw, to be honest with you, and do that a lot more consistently and say to himself, listen, I'm going to turn this into a 6-round fight, and I'm either going to go out on my shield or I'm going to break you down. Because there was no way he was ever going to be able to match the tempo of Tyler Denny. And when he was landing on Denny, even when Denny was a little bit, there were points where he paused after a big shot, and I felt as though he was feeling that. You saw that he'd come straight back. He was a little Tasmanian devil, a little whirlwind. And in the recent Frank Martin Rivera fight, I spoke about how Rivera had a problem in the build up to the fight, that Michelle Rivera's toes point to the side, almost to like a 2 p.m. position rather than 12 p.m. And the problem with that against the southpaw is that if he is going to get that outside angle on you because he's stepping outside your lead foot, by the time you adjust, because your feet aren't facing him, you can't just turn quickly in the way Liam Smith's toes, for instance, will point at the opponent. You have to readjust your lead foot position in order to turn. And that extra split second can be a real problem with the southpaw getting the angle on you. And you saw tonight that Tyler Denny was getting the angle on Pauls, who had that issue quite consistently. And like I said, I didn't see the whole fight. I missed some of the early rounds. But yeah, it was a good performance from Tyler Denny, and he's shown that he's got a little bit of an engine on him and he's an entertaining fighter to watch. So let me know what you thought about the fights tonight. What are you making of Adam Azim? Do you think he's ready for Dalton Smith? Where do you see he goes from here? Do you see the comparisons that I'm making to Ryan Garcia? I don't think he's at that level. Obviously, Ryan Garcia has proven himself to be a world-class fighter. He's beaten the likes of Luke Campbell. Adam Azim's still domestic, right? We're just talking about the sort of visual aesthetic similarities here, the stylistic similarities. Let me know what you think as well about ZAK CHELLI. Where do you think he goes from here? How does Anthony Sims Jr. manage to rejuvenate his career? Is there a problem there for him? Where would you like to see Tyler Denny go as well? And VIDDAL RILEY also. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please don't forget to hit a stiff jab on the like button, a right cross on the subscribe button, and an uppercut on the notifications button. Thanks for watching. Chat to you soon. Take care. God bless.